Ben Shapiro sat down with Lex Fridman, and Lex took this opportunity to really press Ben about God. And he starts by asking him some of the simple questions about like who God is, why he created us, but then later on, he starts to really disagree with him and contest him with some really tough questions about God. So I'm going to let that video play out, and then I'm going to give my thoughts at the end. Let's get into it.
Let me ask you back to the question of God, and a big ridiculous question: who's God?
Who is God? So I'm going to use sort of the Aquinas formulation of what God is, right? That if there is a cause of all things, not physical things, if there is a cause underlying the reason of the universe, then that is the thing we call God. So not a big guy in the sky with a beard, like he is the force underlying the logic of the universe, if there is a logic to the universe, and he is the creator in the Judaic view of that universe, and he does have an interest in us living in accordance with the laws of the universe that, if you're a religious Jew, are encoded in the Torah, but if you're not a religious Jew, would be encoded in the natural law by sort of Catholic theology.
Why do you think God created the universe? Or as is popularly asked, what do you think is the meaning behind it? What's the meaning of life?
What's the meaning of life? So I think that the meaning of life is to fulfill what God made you to do, and that is a series of roles. I think that human beings, and here you have to look to sort of human nature, rather than looking kind of to big questions. I've evolved something that I've really been working on, and I'm writing a book about this actually, that I call colloquially role theory. And basically the idea is that the way that we interact with the world is through a series of roles. And those are also the things we find most important and most implementable. And there's sort of virtue ethics, right, which suggests that if we act in accordance with virtue, like Aristotle, then we will be living the most fulfilled and meaningful life. And then you have sort of deontological ethics, like Kantian ethics, that it's a rule-based ethic. If you follow the rules, then you'll find the meaning of life. And then what I'm proposing is that there's something that I would call role ethics, which is there are a series of roles that we play across our lives, which are also the things that we tend to put on our tombstones and find the most meaningful. So when you go to a cemetery, you can see what people found the most meaningful because it's the stuff they put on the stone that has like 4 words on it, right? Like beloved father, beloved mother, sister, brother. And you might have a job once in a while, a creator, a religious person, right? These are all roles that have existed across societies and across humanity. And those are the things where we actually find meaning. And the way that we navigate those roles brings us meaning. And I think that God created us in order to fulfill those roles for purposes that I can't begin to understand because I ain't him. And the more we recognize those roles and the more we live those roles, and then we can express freedom within those roles. I think that the liberty exists inside each of those roles, and that's what makes all of our lives different and fun. We all parent in different ways, but being a parent is a meaningful role. We all have spouses, but how you interact that relationship is what makes your life meaningful and interesting. And that is what we were put on earth to do. And if we perform those roles properly, and those roles do include things like being a creator, like we have a creative instinct as human beings, being a creator, being an innovator, being a defender of your family, being somebody who builds up, being a social member of your community, which is something that we're built to do. If we fulfill those roles properly, then we will have made the world a better place than we inherited it. And we will also have had the joy of experiencing the sort of flow they talk about in psychology, where when you engage in these roles, you actually do feel a flow.
That's going to have to give me a lot to think about. Let me ask a personal question. Was there ever a time that you had a crisis of faith where you questioned your belief in God?
Sure. And I would less call it a crisis of faith than an ongoing question of faith, which I think is, I hope, most religious people. The word Israel, right, in Hebrew, Yisrael, means to struggle with God. That's literally what the word means. And so the idea of struggling with God, right, where if you're Jewish, you're B'nai Yisrael, right, the idea of struggling with God, I think, is endemic to the human condition. If you understand what God's doing, then I think you're wrong. And if you think that question doesn't matter, then I think you're also wrong. I think that God is a very necessary hypothesis.
So the struggle with God is life. That is the process of life.
That's right. Because you're never going to get to that answer. Otherwise, you're God and you aren't. So
why does God allow cruelty and suffering in the world? One of the tough questions.
So we're going deep here. There's two types of cruelty and suffering. So if we're talking about human cruelty and suffering, because God does not intervene to prevent people from exercising their free will, because to do so would be to deprive human beings of the choice that makes them human. Right? This is the sin of the Garden of Eden, basically, is that God could make you an angel, in which case you wouldn't have the choice to do the wrong thing. But so long as we are going to allow for cause and effect in a universe shaped by your choice, cruelty and evil are going to exist. And then there's the question of just the natural cruelty and vicissitudes of life. And the answer there is, I think that God obscures himself. I think that if God were to appear in all of his glory to people on a regular basis, I think that it would make faith, you wouldn't need it. There'd be no such thing as faith, right? It would just be reality, right? Nobody has to prove to you that the sun rises every day. But if God is to allow us the choice to believe in him, which is the ultimate choice from a religious point of view, then he's going to have to obscure himself behind tragedy and horror and all those other things. I mean, this is a fairly well-known Kabbalistic concept called Tzimtzum in Judaism, which is the idea that when God created the universe, he sort of withdrew in order to make space for all of these things to happen.
So God doesn't have an instrumental perspective on liberty.
In a chief sense, he does, because the best use of liberty is going to be belief in him. And you can misuse your liberty, right? There will be consequences if you believe in an afterlife, or if you believe in sort of a generalized, better version of life led by faith. Then liberty does have a purpose. But he also believes that you have to give people, from a cosmic perspective, the liberty to do wrong without threatening all the institutions of society. I mean, that's why it does say in the Bible that if man sheds blood, by man shall his blood be shed, right? There are punishments that are in biblical thought for doing things that are wrong.
So for a human being who lacks the faith in God, so if you're an atheist, can you still be a good person?
Of course, 100%. And there are a lot of religious people who are crappy people.
How do we understand that tension?
Well, from a religious perspective, what you would say is that it is perfectly plausible to live in accordance with a set of rules that don't damage other people without believing in God. You just might be understanding the reason for doing that wrong, is what a religious person would say. This is the conversation, again, that I had with Sam, basically, is you and I agree. I said this to Sam. You and I agree on nearly everything when it comes to morality. Like, we probably disagree on 15 to 20% of things. The other 80% is because you grew up in a Judeo-Christian society, and so do I, and we grew up 10 miles from each other, around the turn of the millennium. So there's that. So you can perfectly well be an atheist living a good, moral, decent life, because you can live a good, moral, decent life with regard to other people without believing in God. I don't think you can build a society on that, because I think that, that relies on the sort of goodness of mankind, natural goodness of mankind. I don't believe in the natural goodness of mankind.
You don't?
No. I believe that man is created both sinful and with the capacity for sin and the capacity for good.
But if you let them be on their own, doesn't it
without social institutions to shape them, I think that's very likely to go poorly.
Oh, interesting. Well, we came to something we disagree on, but that may be that might reflect itself in our approach to Twitter as well. I think if humans are left on their own, they tend towards good. They definitely have the capacity for good and evil, but when left on their own, I tend to believe they're good.
I think they might be good with limits. What I mean by that is that what the evidence, I think, tends to show is that human beings are quite tribal. So what you'll end up with is people who are good with their immediate family and maybe their immediate neighbors, and then when they're threatened by an outside tribe, then they kill everyone, which is sort of the history of civilization in the pre-civilizational era, which was a very violent time.
What does it mean to be a good man? The various role that a human being takes on in this role theory that you've spoken about, what does it mean to be a good?
It means to perform. Now I will do Aristotle. It means to perform the function well. Right? What Aristotle says is the good is not like moral good, moral evil, in the way that we tend to think about it. He meant that a good cup holds liquid, and a good spoon holds soup. It means that like a thing that is broken can't hold those things, right? So The idea of being a good person means that you are fulfilling the function for which you were made. And it's a teleological view of humanity. So if you're a good father, this means that you are bringing up your child in durable values that is going to bring them up healthy, capable of protecting themselves and passing on the traditional wisdom of the ages to future generations while allowing for the capacity for innovation. That'd be being a good father. Right? Being a good spouse would mean protecting and unifying with your spouse and building a safe family and a place to raise children. Being a good citizen of your community means protecting the fellow citizens of your community while incentivizing them to build for themselves.
I like the way that Lex Fridman has been asking these questions. I think as I see more and more of him, that he's a guy who really is wrestling with the idea of God. And I think the way that he approaches trying to seek God is a very healthy way that is ultimately going to lead him to Jesus. And I think that Ben Shapiro also did a pretty good job answering Lex's questions here. But I also think he kind of sidestepped them in a way because he started taking a more philosophical approach with them, when I feel like Lex was really looking for more religious answers here, especially because Ben's an Orthodox Jew, so he was probably expecting more of the spiritual component to them. So I'm going to focus and try and flesh out some of those answers a little bit further from the spiritual perspective. So he was asking about the meaning of life and what God says, and there's a few Bible principles that we can draw from the text. And so here are just 3 quick verses to help us do that. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. So we're called to glorify God and keep his commandments. Next one. Everyone who is called by my name, whom I created for my glory, whom I formed and made. And so there we learn that we are to serve and worship God. The third one. He has shown you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy and walk humbly for God. And so we're called to live righteously and justly as well. And then they also got into the discussion there about if you can be an atheist and live morally. And they ended up agreeing, but I think an important component that Ben could have touched on, now he's a Jew, so he doesn't believe in the New Testament, but there's this really good verse in the New Testament that says, they show that the requirements of the law are written on their hearts, their consciences also bearing witness, and their thoughts sometimes accusing them, and at other times even defending them. And so what I take this to mean is that we have the law and the morals of God in our conscience, and that it can inform our decisions. So absolutely, even if an atheist doesn't believe in God, like they have that component there to listen to their conscience, to listen to their intuition. Now, it's not perfect and they can reject it and listen to their own selfish motives as well, but it's perfectly plausible to do that. And the third thing is they were kind of disagreeing about the nature of man, and Ben Shapiro took another philosophical approach. But if we're going for a more spiritual component, human nature is evil and sinful. The Bible says the heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it? And in the New Testament, it also says, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And this is a really tough concept to tell anybody. I heard George Janko say on his podcast, how am I supposed to tell anybody that no matter how hard they work, no matter how hard they try, that they will never be good enough, that they can never earn their way to enlightenment or heaven or the ultimate good? Like, that is a crushing thing to tell a person. But the good news is that there is salvation found in Jesus Christ, that our works cannot save us, but that we can be saved by grace through faith, through Jesus, when we believe in the sacrifice that he gave for us on the cross. And faith is not just like head knowledge or temporary faith, but it is like a true and lasting trust in Jesus, because even the demons believe that Jesus Christ is Lord. So it's not enough to just know. You have to believe and trust. And it's my prayer to Lex Fridman that God sends Christian messengers into his life, and that he softens his heart and opens his eyes to the gospel truth, and that you just pierce his heart, transform him, and give him that reckless love of Jesus. In the name of Jesus, amen. If you enjoyed this video, you want to see another one like it, I'm going to throw up another one with Ben Shapiro in it again, and he gets confronted with the historical resurrection of Jesus, and I think it's a very compelling argument. I highly recommend it. With that being said, have a great day, y'all. Bye-bye.